Welcome to Canonically Speaking, a podcast in which distinguished canonists share some of the experiences and insights they've gained throughout their career that can be of interest and benefit to others in the canonical world. Today it's my pleasure to have as my guest Fr Benjamin Earl of the Order of Preachers, otherwise known as the Dominicans, who serves as the Procurator General of the Order in Rome, where he's responsible for representing the Order to the Holy See and for canonical issues in the Order's General Curia. So welcome, Fr Benjamin, and perhaps I could begin by asking you to explain a little about your own canonical journey, the path you've taken, how it was that you came to be involved in canon law and eventually end up in your current position as Procurator General of the Order.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me and having the opportunity to have this conversation. I suppose if we go back to the beginning, before entering the Order, I studied mathematics and then computer science at university. And when I entered the Order, the idea of bringing, God's creative act, bringing order out of chaos, I think of the first chapter of the book of Genesis, was something that was very attractive as a notion. And our participation in God's creation, sustaining of creation, perhaps if in some small manner, we can help to bring some order out of the chaos that sometimes we see around us. There might be some small sense of participation in the divine. Maybe I'm over-spiritualizing canon law, but there certainly is a certain attraction there. Of course, as a Dominican friar, there's also an aspect of obedience. We need to have canon lawyers, both for the apostolate of the Order, because the Church needs canon lawyers, but also for our own internal governance, because, well, we're human beings. We have all the problems that human beings have, and occasionally those need canonical legal approaches to sort them out. During my studies, it seemed to be something that I could do, that I was relatively happy doing. And so when it came to working out with my superiors what was an appropriate direction to be going in for further studies, canon law seemed to be the logical direction in which to go. As it happened, I came to Rome to study for the license and lived at Santa Sabina, which is our general curia, where I now am once again. And during that time, I was assistant to the Procurator General. So I had a certain way into the way that the General Curia works, the way that canon law functions in that context of the government of a religious order.
So what were the kind of things you would come across then working alongside the Procurator General at that time?
We have a lot of individual cases at the moment, and I think similarly in those days, we had something like 140 personal cases a year. By personal cases, I mean an individual friar of the order or a nun, or occasionally a sister, who would be asking for something, making a petition, or perhaps in some cases we might be dealing with a dismissal case. Perhaps we will be having somebody who is having something of a wobble, you might say, in their vocational journey, needing permission for absence or exclaustration or something like that. So those would be the sorts of cases we will be dealing with in terms of something that arrives in the form of a dossier. There's also a side of the work which is giving canonical advice to the officials of the General Curia, to the provincial officials throughout the order about the various problems they might have.
And so you spent a few years in Rome, but you came back to England for a while?
Yes, I finished the license in canon law, oh goodness, nearly 20 years ago, which makes me feel old, but tempus fugit. And I was back in our house of formation in Oxford for a few years, where I was teaching canon law. I was also a provincial bursar for the province of England of the Order of Preachers. I think that, again, somebody thought, oh, well, he studied mathematics, therefore he can do sums, therefore he can be bursar. I'm not sure that any of those logical steps actually really make sense, but it's what I was asked to do.
So you don't think, for example, that your mathematical background might have helped in giving you a sense of precision in assessing the meaning of laws?
Or in the meaning, perhaps more in the sense of accessing the meaning of laws, yes. I think sometimes people think that university level studies in mathematics just means you can do some very complicated sums, and that's not really what higher mathematics is about. but yes, much more precise, clear, logical thinking, which perhaps is more of a preparation for the law than you might think, and less of a preparation for doing sums and the sort of thing that a bursar has to do. But one turns one's hands to the things that one is asked to do.
And so after Blackfriars, you were in the north of England, weren't you?
I was. For years, I was the Catholic chaplain to the University of Durham and parish priest of the parish there in the centre of the city. I had St Bede as a parishioner in a certain sense, and St Cuthbert, we did at least in the territory of the parish, not in our church, of course. And that was a very interesting period. I think it's a great privilege to be accompanying young people taking their first steps as adults, taking their first steps in certain sense with a greater freedom in living the faith, and as they explore the various questions of the faith that they find out. So it's been a great joy to have done that. And it's a job that never finishes, because you remain in touch with the people whom you knew then. I've had the privilege of celebrating a few of their marriages, baptizing some of their children, or even on occasions attending their ordinations or their professions as priests, deacons, religious. So it's something that even for a relatively short period in my life, I was just there for 4 years, but has an ongoing benefit for me, because it lifts the heart when you see that faith for the young people. I have to say,
Yes.
Not so young now. They're now responsible parents, some of them, or responsible priests. But
Yes. I mean, I know there's obedience and so on, but it must have been quite a wrench for you to have to leave that world. It sounds like quite a happy existence during those years.
it was happy. It was hard work, of course. You occasionally had the people saying, "Oh, Father, can I come and see you about something?" I can only manage evenings and weekends. So I get out the door and say, I have a free evening or weekend in about 2 months' time. It was kept busy, but yes, a joyful time. I suppose when it comes to my current role, it was always something that might have happened, because I'd done the studies here. I had the languages, so I could cope with the work that comes in here. I knew basically the job that I'm now being asked to do. But when the call came, it was something of a surprise. But that does happen on occasions. And in religious life, obviously, superiors want to hear what we think about the jobs we're being asked to do. But in the end, if there's no good objection to doing it, then you obey.
So you've been in your current role since
2016, my 9th year in the role. So I'm approaching halfway through a second 6-year term.
Right. Now, you mentioned you deal with quite a lot of consultations. That's on the universal law and on your own proper law, presumably, in the Dominicans. And there have been some quite significant changes to the law in recent years. I'm wondering, one major area, of course, is the law applicable to women religious and therefore affecting the Dominican contemplative nuns. I assume that presents you with quite a lot of new challenges, especially regarding the federation of institutes and so on.
Yes, so this goes back to the Apostolic Constitution, Vultum Dei Quaere of 2016, although for the next 2 years, not a lot happened, because everybody was waiting for the dicastery, what was then the Congregation for Consecrated Life, to issue its instruction applying the Apostolic Constitution. So when that came out in 2018, Cor Orans, then things really began to pick up. Some things it made a little bit easier, in that it did give the possibility of granting exclaustrations to the prioresses of monasteries or to the presidents of the federations. That saved me a lot of work, because previously every exclaustration of a nun, even just for a year, had to go to the Holy See. So we did get saved a little bit of work. But the need for monasteries to enter into federations, many of our monasteries already were, but not all of them. And some parts of the world needed quite a lot of work to set up federations. Now, the bulk of the work was done by the nuns themselves, but I was the Roman end of that work, and it was for me to present those requests to the Holy See. So we're now in a situation that almost all of our monasteries are members of federations. And I hope that they're beginning to see the fruits of that. I think it's important for the nuns that they realize that they're not on their own. They are in autonomous monasteries, but autonomous doesn't mean completely independent from everything going on in the world. There is a communion, there is a fraternity which is there, and that includes supporting them when they're facing up to difficult situations, which many monasteries are. So yes, working with the contemplative nuns of the order has been an important part of that work over the last few years.
And then you deal with, you mentioned the different dossiers, canonical dossiers of one sort or another. Lots of requests for exclaustration or leaving.
Well, I'd like to divide them into the good, the bad, and the ugly. There are good things, and I like to seize on the good things, really. There are some dispensations and permissions in order to do positive things. There are some people, when they join the order, for example, who need a permission. For example, members of the Eastern churches need a permission from the Holy See if they join the order. But that's generally good news when I have to ask that sort of thing. And setting up new structures, new provinces, new federations, as we mentioned. And these structures need their own statutes, they need decrees to set them up. And a lot of that drafting work, or at least checking work, comes to me. And for a canonist, it's always good to be able to set up the structures so that they function properly and hopefully avoid problems in the future. It's much better if we can avoid the problems before they arise, or at least set up the structures to deal with them properly when they arise, than to try and build the structures when the house is already falling down, if that's an analogy that works. So the good things, setting up good structures. There are the bad things. When religious life goes wrong, there are administrative recourses, hierarchical recourses, either to us or against us, as the case may be, and the canonical side of that is something I would have to deal with. There are when the vocations go wrong and you have things like exclaustrations, indults to leave the order, dispensations from the obligations of the clerical state for priests and deacons, dismissals on occasion, suppressions of structures. Not good news, bad news indeed in a certain sense, though obviously it's right to be able to respond to those issues appropriately, effectively, with charity, one hopes, but also with truth and with justice. So you have the good, you have the bad, you do also have the ugly that canonists have to deal with, and that does mean that there are penal cases from time to time, some penal cases of the kind which are reserved to the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, including the child abuse cases, and that's obviously not a pleasant thing to have to deal with, but it's important that it is dealt with. I think we all see in the church we see the terrible damage this has done to the people when it was done to them, but we also see the incredible damage that's been done when it hasn't been dealt with correctly, both to the victims and to the church and to the whole of society. So that's the ugly side, but it does need to be dealt with.
And what degree of contact does your work involve you in with the Holy Father? Do you have any direct dealings with him, or do you have any particular recollections of things that have happened?
A lot of my work does end up one way or another on his desk. I know that my work does reach him, but mostly that's presented through the various dicasteries of the Roman Curia. As you can imagine, the Pope's time is somewhat limited, so he gets, in most cases, a summary. In other cases, perhaps a slightly fuller presentation. As Procurator General, I'm technically a member of the papal household, a member of the Pontifical Chapel. Now, that's along with several thousand other people in the world, so it's not as if the Pope actually knows personally every person in his household. It basically means I get a seat close to the action when it comes to major liturgical celebrations. So I get to sit relatively close to the Pope, but only very occasionally actually get to exchange words with him. That said, living here at Santa Sabina, our General Curia, we have the privilege of being the station church for Ash Wednesday. Traditionally, the popes went to a different church each day through the whole of Lent. They don't do that anymore, but John the 23rd re-established the tradition of, at least on the first day of Lent, the Pope going to the station church, which is our church of Santa Sabina. So we do at least receive the Pope here once a year and see him up close, even if we don't get to exchange too many words with him.
And when your role is described as including representing the order to the Holy See, what does that mean?
Sometimes we say the Procurator General is something of an ambassador. Clearly, the Superior General of a religious order, certainly one the size of ours, spends a lot of his time traveling around the world, visiting the brothers, visiting the nuns. Somebody has to present all these cases. I mentioned something of the order of 140 a year, not all of those for the Holy See. So I am the one who actually writes the letters to present these petitions to the Holy See. I'm the one who has the meetings with the various officials in different dicasteries when we are asking for some favor, for some decree, for some rescript. So that's the sort of job that the Procurator General has in terms of representing the order to the Holy See.
Right. And we know all the work that you're doing is for the salvation of souls, and I suppose there must be some sense of satisfaction when you are able to resolve situations of difficulty and doubt. But having to deal with those bad and ugly cases, people wanting to leave their vocation or being asked to leave, or people in dispute with their superiors, or people accused of offences, does it have a wearying effect, or do you have a way of staying optimistic in the middle of all of that?
I have to keep telling myself, first of all, that the number of cases I'm dealing with, which are plenty to keep me busy, still represent a relatively small percentage of an order like ours. We have around about 5,500 friars, 2,000 nuns, then lay Dominicans, sisters. I don't deal so much with the sisters. So those that cross my desk are a relatively small proportion. So if somebody asks me, do I know a particular friar in a particular province in some other part of the world? And if I say, well, no, that's probably a good thing, because it means his file has not crossed my desk at any point. Sometimes they cross my desk for good reasons.
Stay cheerful.
Stay cheerful. You have to remember that there is a lot of good work going on. As Procurator, I'm also a member of the General Council of the Order, which means I do see the reports of the good work which is being done around the world. So I can rejoice in that, even though it's not the responsibility of my office. It is the responsibility of the council to keep an eye on those sorts of things.
Could you give some examples of the good that is happening at the moment?
Well, we often get requests from bishops or bishops' conferences if we can take on particular works. Sadly, we can't do everything. One place we are going at the moment, as an example, is Madagascar, where the Bishops' Conference there has asked us to take on a seminary. And so brothers from our province of Toulouse in the southern part of France are now in the process of starting up a community there and taking on a seminary there. And we're hoping that that will be something that the whole of the order will be part of. So the nuns too are looking at making a foundation in Madagascar so that their prayers can support the work that we are doing there. But there are various other places in the world as well where we take on new missions. Like we have 500 priories in the world, so I couldn't possibly go through all of the good things that are going on everywhere. But that's just one example of something new that we're doing to bring the gospel, at least somewhere which is new for us.
And, well, another question is, since you're part of the Order of Preachers, I wonder whether you find that what you're doing is compatible with, all this involvement in the canon law, is it compatible with, or does it hinder, or does it even help what I imagine is your primary charism, which is that of preaching?
Certainly, when I entered the order, I didn't imagine myself doing the sort of job I'm doing at the moment. I was aware there was such a thing as canon law, and I suppose if I'd stopped to think about it, somebody had to deal with these sorts of things. And indeed, I occasionally talk to brothers in the order today who assume the Procurator General is probably the bursar of the order, the one who looks after the money. That's rather disappointing. It means they haven't opened the Book of Constitutions to look at what the functions of the General Curia are. But in some sense, I'm not disappointed, because it does mean that people are focused on the preaching of the gospel. I think when we talk about preaching, we don't just mean standing up after the gospel and expounding the faith and encouraging people in their Christian lives. That's obviously a very important part of it. But bringing the truth to either the faithful or the whole of the world is also part of it. Certainly part of what we do as canonists, and what I do as Procurator General, does involve a ministry of the truth. Certainly when we're dealing with complicated cases, we are trying to see the truth and tell the truth and do the just thing. And acting justly is part of the Christian gospel, obviously. So there is some of that preaching in the actual carrying out of my office. At the same time, I think in an office like this, it's always important to stay in touch with your life as a Christian, fundamentally, as a religious, as a priest, to try to live the life of virtue to which Christ calls us, of course. As a religious, our general curate is, of course, a convent, a priory. We are a religious community. We pray the divine office every day. We celebrate Mass together every day. We eat together. We recreate together. We have, to a certain extent, an apostolate in our basilica here at Santa Sabina. And many of us, including myself, from time to time are going out to celebrate Masses, to hear confessions, to preach. Obviously, it's a relatively small part of my time because I have a full-time job. But it's very important, I think, to keep one's hand in with those things, to keep grounded in the Christian life, in the religious life, in the priestly life. Otherwise, it would be terribly easy to lose one's way.
Well, I'm sure in your present job, you are doing a lot to bring peace to souls. I mean, a lot of troubled souls, conflicted souls. And if you're able to resolve their situations, it's obviously a great service to them. Well, thank you, Father Benjamin, for your time today. It's been a great pleasure. It's been very enlightening hearing of your various tasks and responsibilities and challenges. And I wish you good luck for the remainder of your term in your present office there, and we'll see what the future holds. So thank you very much once again, and I hope we'll speak soon. Goodbye and God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you again to my guest today, Father Benjamin Earl, OP, and to my producer, Charlie Brown. And thank you to Imma Setiadi for her rendition of CP Bach Solfeggetto, which opens and closes this podcast. I'm Father Paul Hayward, and you've been listening to Canonically Speaking. Please be sure to subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts for more interesting conversations from the world of canon law. And if you have any questions, comments, or even suggestions of guests for future episodes, then please do contact the show on canonicallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. So, until the next time, goodbye and God bless.